The scent of freshly cut cedar was supposed to be the fragrance of my new life. It was the smell of tangible things, of quiet labor, a clean and welcome departure from the sterile, recycled air, and the corrosive atmosphere of conflict that had defined my 40-year career. I was Samuel Croft, a name that, until 6 months ago, was embossed on the letterhead of a top-tier law firm. I was a man who had navigated the treacherous waters of commercial real estate litigation and corporate bankruptcy, where every word was a potential weapon and every comma a potential loophole. Now, my most adversarial negotiation was meant to be with a stubborn knot in a plank of maple, destined for a new workbench. This life in Oakhaven Estates was a blueprint drawn by my late wife, Helen. She had envisioned a sanctuary here, a peaceful epilogue to my demanding career. We'd purchased the comfortable house on its manicured lot, and, as a separate, critical acquisition, a small, rustic cabin on the shore of the nearby lake. That cabin was the heart of the plan. It was where I would finally build the furniture we'd always dreamed of, and where she would set up her easel, capturing the shifting moods of the water on canvas. Helen was gone now, stolen by an illness that moved with the speed and finality of a closing gavel. Building this life we had designed together was no longer a plan for the future. It was a memorial, a final solemn duty to the woman who was my entire world. The first step in this new life was a fence. It was a practical necessity, a simple 4-foot cedar enclosure to give my golden retriever, Buster, the freedom of the backyard. Buster, a furry, soulful creature, had been my shadow since Helen's passing. His quiet companionship, a balm on the raw wound of her absence. On the third day of the fence's construction, as the crew was meticulously setting the posts in concrete, a different kind of shadow fell across the property. She moved with the rigid posture of someone perpetually convinced of their own correctness. A woman who seemed to believe the force of her will alone could straighten the very curvature of the earth. Her name, I would soon discover, was Judith Sterling, and she was the president of the Oakhaven Homeowners Association. She was clad in crisp, beige linen trousers and a startlingly white silk blouse, an attire more suited for a hostile takeover than a neighborhood stroll. In her hand, she clutched a leather-bound folio, a more pretentious version of the standard-issue Karen clipboard. "Mr. Croft," she announced, her voice a peculiar blend of feigned politeness and sharpened steel. Her attention was not on me, but was fixed with predatory intensity on the precise line of post holes marring the edge of the lawn. "It's Sam. Please," I responded, extending a hand out of ingrained habit. She regarded it for a moment, as if it were a strange and faintly disgusting piece of flora, then deliberately ignored it. "I am Judith Sterling, and I'm afraid," she said, though her tone conveyed no fear or regret whatsoever, "that we have a problem with this structure." She waved a dismissive hand at the stacks of fragrant cedar planks. "This fence is a gross violation of Oakhaven's aesthetic covenants." Before signing the mountain of closing documents, I had, of course, read the Oakhaven covenants, conditions, and restrictions from cover to cover, dissecting them with the same focused intensity I would apply to a billion-dollar merger agreement. It was a professional reflex, a deeply ingrained habit of never ever signing a document without understanding its every implication. "I believe I'm in full compliance, Judith," I stated, my tone even. "Section 12 of the CC&Rs explicitly permits cedar fencing up to a maximum height of 6 feet. This design is for 4 feet. The plans, I should add, were submitted to and approved in writing by the Architectural Review Committee last month." A subtle, blotchy pink flush crept up her neck, a telltale sign of a person unaccustomed to being contradicted by fact. The committee's approval was provisional. Mr. Croft. It was contingent upon a final site inspection by me. You are erecting a solid, visual barrier that completely obstructs the natural view corridor from the common area park. It creates a feeling of enclosure. It is, frankly, hostile in its posture. A view corridor, I repeated, turning to look at the dense, impassable thicket of woods that my property backed onto. The only view being obstructed is that of my private patio. And with all due respect to your authority, I can't seem to recall any language in the governing documents that mentions view corridors, or any bylaws pertaining to the emotional posture of a fence. The muscles around her jaw tightened into knots. There are unwritten standards. Mr. Croft, there is the spirit of the community, something that cold legal documents cannot always capture. It is the express role of the HOA president to interpret these standards for the continued harmony and financial well-being of the community. She snapped open her folio with a flourish. I am therefore issuing a formal stop work order. All construction will cease immediately. You will not proceed until you have submitted a revised plan. I would suggest a split-rail fence that is more in keeping with Oak Haven's open, welcoming, and harmonious design philosophy. I stared at her, a profound sense of weariness washing over me. I had faced down battalions of lawyers from the most powerful firms in the country. I had argued cases in front of judges who could smell weakness like a shark smells blood. And now, the gatekeeper to my peaceful retirement was a woman who had just fabricated a legal argument based on her personal interior design preferences. Adding to the intrigue was her name, Sterling, the original developer of Oak Haven, the one my firm had represented the creditors against in the bankruptcy proceedings, had been Sterling Development. The connection was too direct to be a coincidence. This was not just a random power trip. There was something more personal simmering beneath the surface. I will take your order under advisement, I said, falling back on the old, non-committal language of the deposition room. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She knew she was being managed, not obeyed, and it was a distinction she clearly despised. See that you do more than advise. Mr. Croft, see that you comply. She pivoted with military precision and marched off, leaving me standing in the humid afternoon air. The clean, promising scent of cedar was now tainted with the acrid, unmistakable odor of a protracted and deeply personal conflict. My decision to take her order under advisement was, in practice, a decision to continue the work. The legal and financial calculus was simple. The fence was contractually compliant, and the cost of halting construction would far exceed any illegitimate fine Judith could conjure. Her stop work order had no legal standing. It was a bluff, and I had spent my entire career calling bluffs far more intimidating than this one. The response was swift. The following morning, an elegant, cream-colored envelope was taped to my front door. Inside, a formal citation printed on heavy cardstock announced a fine of $150 for the use of unapproved fence material. Judith's handwriting, a florid and aggressive script, added a personal touch at the bottom, as per our verbal discussion. Solid cedar planking is contrary to the spirit of the Oak Haven community. I sighed. The spirit of the community was a nebulous and apparently punitive entity. This was the first official move, the first document in what I knew would become a long and tedious paper trail. I immediately made a call. Anna, I said when my former junior partner, now a rising star at the firm, picked up. It's Sam. Sam, I was going to call you to see how retirement was going. Don't tell me you're already bored and want your old office back. Far from it, I said. I'm calling on a professional matter. I need you to act as my counsel of record. I'm opening a personal file. It seems I'm in a dispute with my new HOA president." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "An HOA, Sam. You used to eat corporate raiders for breakfast. What can an HOA possibly do?" "You'd be surprised," I said. "For now, I just need you on retainer. I'm going to start forwarding you documents. We're building a file. The president's name is Judith Sterling." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and heavy. "Sterling," Anna said, her voice now sharp with professional interest. "As in Sterling Development." "The very same." I confirmed. "I suspect there's a personal history here I've stumbled into. Just keep a file for now. Timestamp and log everything I send. Let's be methodical." My first official act as my own client was to draft a formal response to the board. It was a masterwork of polite, legally precise language. I cited Section 12, subsection 4A of the CC&Rs regarding approved materials. I attached a copy of the Architectural Committee's written approval. I enclosed a photograph of the cedar planks. I concluded by stating that, as the fine was factually and contractually baseless, it would not be paid. I sent copies to every board member, not just Judith, via certified mail. I then forwarded the entire package to Anna with the subject line Sterling v. Croft, Exhibit A. Judith's reaction was one of escalating fury. The fines began to rain down, each one more ludicrous than the last. A $75 fine, because the natural cedar stain was, in her opinion, the wrong shade of brown. A $50 fine, because the simple, functional post caps were not of a sufficiently decorative character. My personal favorite was a $100 fine for a gate hinge that was, she claimed, a quarter of an inch out of alignment with its partner. A violation of a general neatness and order clause that existed only in her imagination. For each notice, the process was the same. A meticulously crafted rebuttal, citing the governing documents, sent via certified mail to the entire board, and a copy forwarded to Anna with a new exhibit number. My internal monologue had shifted from that of a homeowner to that of a litigator building a case. This establishes a clear and deliberate pattern of harassment. I thought as I sealed another envelope. Her claims are arbitrary and capricious, designed not to enforce the rules, but to punish and intimidate. This is a classic abuse of corporate authority. Her personal history, the one I suspected, began to bleed through in her escalating attacks. She saw me not just as a disobedient resident, but as the ghost of the machine that had dismantled her family's legacy. The Sterling Development bankruptcy had been a brutal affair, and my firm, representing the creditors, had been unyielding in its mission to recover every possible asset for our clients. That included liquidating the very land Oakhaven was built on. Judith, I surmised, had grown up with the blueprint of Oakhaven not as a business plan, but as a birthright. Her father's dream. Now, her only connection to that lost empire was this small, manufactured community, and her role as its president was not a volunteer position. It was her only remaining throne. I, the man whose firm had overseen the collapse, had moved into her kingdom. And in her warped perception, my compliant, by-the-book fence was not a home improvement project. It was an act of defiance, a new attack on the last vestiges of the Sterling name. The war of paper and ink was destined to become physical. The first casualty was the latch on my new gate. I came out one morning to find it twisted and bent, the heavy steel mangled as if by a pipe wrench. The gate hung ajar. Buster, thankfully, was still sleeping inside. But the message was chillingly clear. This wasn't just about aesthetics anymore. It was a direct and malicious threat to the safety of my dog. The anger that rose in me was cold, sharp, and focused. This crossed a line from civil harassment into criminal action. I installed a temporary bolt and immediately called a local contact, a former investigator I'd worked with who now ran a high-end security firm. "John, it's Sam Croft. I need a comprehensive, evidence-grade surveillance system for my residence. And I need it yesterday." 2 days later, as the system was being discreetly installed, the next attack came. The words HOA property, scrawled in stark white spray paint, appeared on the side of my fence facing the woods. It was a crude, territorial marking, a desperate attempt to assert a dominion that didn't exist. It was also a gift. The new cameras were state-of-the-art, with overlapping fields of view and high-resolution night vision. The hooded figure who crept out of the woods after 2:00 a.m. to deface my fence was captured from 3 different angles. The footage wasn't clear enough for a positive facial identification, but it showed the figure's height, build, and gait. More importantly, it provided a precise timeline for the criminal mischief. I downloaded the footage, saved it onto a dedicated hard drive, and logged it. Then I made another call, this one to a man named David Chen. David was a sharp, ambitious assistant district attorney for the county. I had mentored him years ago when he was a summer intern at my firm, and I had followed his career with a quiet sense of pride. "David, it's Sam Croft. I know you're busy, but I have a hypothetical for you." "Mr. Croft." "Sir, it's an honor. For you. I have time. What's the hypothetical?" "Hypothetically," I said, "if a person were being subjected to a pattern of harassment by an HOA president that was escalating from bogus fines to actual property damage, and you had video evidence of the damage being done, what would be the evidentiary standard to press charges?" "Well, sir," David said, his lawyerly mind kicking into gear, "the video is a great start. We'd need to establish motive and opportunity. The pattern of fines would be powerful in demonstrating motive. If you could get a witness or a confession, that's a slam dunk. But honestly, if the harassment is ongoing, the best thing to do is let them keep going. Let them build the case against themselves. The more overt the acts become, the easier it is to prove intent." That's what I thought. I said, "Thank you, David. I may be in touch again soon." I forwarded the video clips and a summary of the vandalism to Anna. The subject line read, "Sterling v. Croft, Exhibits G, H, and I. Escalation to criminal mischief." My conversation with David had confirmed my strategy. I would not confront Judith about the vandalism. I would repair the fence, paint over the graffiti, and wait. The trap was now baited with a camera lens and legal precedent. All I had to do was give her more rope. She would inevitably use it to hang herself. Judith, emboldened by my lack of an immediate, angry reaction, shifted her campaign to public humiliation. Her chosen battleground was the annual Oakhaven end-of-summer block party. I knew my attendance was mandatory. To be absent would be to cede the field, allowing her to define me to my neighbors without rebuttal. So, I put Buster on his leash, grabbed a bottle of good bourbon for the communal bar, and walked into the ambush. The party was in full swing around the community pool, a scene of forced suburban conviviality. As I entered, I felt the social temperature drop by 20 degrees. The friendly chatter I had previously enjoyed with a few fellow dog owners evaporated. Mark, a man I'd spoken to just last week about golden retrievers, now couldn't meet my eye. Judith had clearly been busy laying the groundwork for my show trial. She stood near the grills, the center of her universe, and waited for the perfect moment. When the music dipped between songs, she raised her voice, a practiced, commanding tone that cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Friends, neighbors," she began, tapping a knife against a wine bottle. "Can I have your attention? I just want to say how wonderful it is to see everyone together, celebrating our beautiful community. Oakhaven is special because we all agree to a certain standard, a shared vision of harmony and respect for our property and for each other." Her eyes, cold and reptilian, found mine across the patio. Most of us, that is. It has come to the board's attention that some new residents do not share our vision. They believe they are above the rules that the rest of us happily live by. They build hostile, unneighborly barricades, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Several people turn to stare openly at me. And worse, they attempt to claim common land for themselves, chipping away at the shared spaces that belong to all of us. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Claim common land. She was transforming a dispute about a fence on my own property into a narrative of theft and aggression. I could feel the weight of dozens of gazes, now tinged with suspicion and hostility. I subtly activated the audio recording app on my phone. "This kind of selfish behavior is a threat to our property values and to our way of life," she concluded, her voice ringing with phony gravitas. "And I want you all to know that your board is exploring every legal option to protect our community from such encroachment." I stood there for a moment, the pariah of the party. I placed the untouched bottle of bourbon on the bar and, with as much dignity as I could muster, turned and walked out, Buster padding quietly beside me. The isolation was now complete and brutally effective. Back in my study, I saved the audio file, labeled it defamation per se, public utterance, and emailed it to Anna. My note was brief. "Add this to the file. We now have a clear case for slander." Her motivation is becoming clearer. She is obsessed with the concept of common land, likely stemming from her family's history with the original development. Her slander, meant to isolate and weaken me, had instead provided a crucial piece of evidence. It had also illuminated her strategy. Her entire campaign was built on the false premise that I was stealing something from the community. It was a narrative that resonated with people's innate fear of loss. I now understood that to defeat her, I couldn't just win the argument about the fence. I had to utterly and publicly destroy the foundational lie of her entire crusade. Judith's next move was as predictable as it was foolish. Humiliated by my silent defiance and armed with her newly crafted public narrative, she escalated the battle over my land grab to the municipal level. An official letter from the city planning department arrived, informing me that the Oakhaven HOA had filed a formal complaint alleging that my fence encroached upon HOA common property. The city would dispatch a surveyor to make a final, binding determination. This was the gift I had been waiting for. This moved the conflict from the kangaroo court of the HOA to a forum of facts and legally binding measurements. This was an opportunity to get an official, third-party refutation of her central lie. I immediately called David Chen at the DA's office. "David, Sam Croft, remember our hypothetical. It's no longer hypothetical. The person in question has filed a formal complaint with the city, using what I am almost certain are fraudulent documents, to claim my property encroaches on common land. A city surveyor is scheduled to come out on Tuesday." "Okay, Sam," David said, his voice all business. "This is perfect. This is a clear, documented action. Here's what you do. Be polite. Be cooperative with the surveyor. Let him do his job. When he inevitably finds that your property line is correct, get his name and his official statement. If he's willing to state for the record that the documents the HOA filed were misleading or fraudulent, that's a huge step towards a criminal complaint for filing a false instrument. On Tuesday morning, the city surveyor, a no-nonsense man named Mr. Chen, no relation to David, arrived. Judith was there, clutching a rolled-up drawing like a sacred scroll. She presented it to him with a flourish. It was, as I suspected, a glossy marketing map from the original developer's brochure. Mr. Chen gave the drawing a cursory, disdainful glance. "Ma'am, this is a cartoon," he said flatly. "I work off the official plat map recorded with the county." He spent the next hour with his instruments, locating the iron survey stakes that had been buried at the corners of my lot for 15 years. I watched from my patio, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. Finally, Mr. Chen confirmed what I already knew. My fence was built a full 6 inches inside my own property line. He delivered the news to Judith in a clipped, professional tone. Her face went through a rapid series of transformations from smug certainty to confusion, to denial, and finally to a deep, blotchy crimson of pure rage. After Judith had stormed off, I approached Mr. Chen. "Thank you for your professionalism," I said. "I have to ask, the complaint she filed, was it based solely on that drawing?" Mr. Chen sighed, shaking his head. The drawing and a signed affidavit from her, swearing that the drawing represented the true and accurate property lines. A sworn affidavit. He looked at me, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. It was a complete waste of my time and the city's resources. "Would you be willing to provide a formal statement to that effect, that the complaint was based on misleading documents and a false affidavit?" He looked over at Judith's retreating figure, his expression hardening. "You bet I would," he said, and handed me his card. I immediately called David and told him what had happened. A sworn affidavit. David whistled. "Oh, she just upgraded from a misdemeanor to a felony. Sam, you've got her. The next move is hers. Let her make it." The trap was now almost fully constructed. She had committed a felony, and we had an official witness. All I needed was for her to make one last, desperate move to spring it. The final, desperate gambit came 2 days after the surveyor had publicly and officially debunked her claims. The humiliation had clearly pushed Judith past the point of reason. She appeared at my front door after dark, her face pale and etched with a furious, obsessive intensity. She didn't wait for me to speak. "You think you're so clever," she hissed, her voice a low, trembling wire of rage. "You think you've won with your surveyors and your legal tricks. But you've forgotten one thing. The cabin." My blood went cold, not with fear, but with the thrill of the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "I've been reviewing the original master plan for Oakhaven," she continued, her eyes gleaming with a manic light. "The real one. The one my father designed. That lakefront. The lodge. The cabin. It was all meant to be part of the community trust. It was an amenity for the residents. The bankruptcy was a legal technicality, but it doesn't change the spirit and intent of the land's designation. That cabin is Oakhaven common property, and you are a trespasser, a squatter." It was a legal argument, born of pure delusion, a fantasy woven from the threads of her family's lost glory and her own desperate need for control. She was confusing a defunct developer's dream with a legally binding covenant. "As president of this association," she declared, puffing out her chest, "I am giving you 48 hours' notice. You will remove every last personal belonging from that cabin. You will surrender the keys to me. If you do not, I will have the sheriff's department forcibly remove you for criminal trespassing. I will have you dragged out of there myself." This was it, the culmination of her entire campaign, the final, fatal overreach. She was going to use law enforcement to enforce a claim based on a ghost of a memory. And in doing so, she was about to walk, with her eyes wide open, into the meticulously constructed legal trap I had been preparing for weeks. I met her gaze, my face a carefully composed mask of weary resignation. "I understand. Judith," I said, my voice heavy with feigned defeat. 48 hours. You've made your position very clear." I closed the door, leaving her standing on my porch, basking in the glow of what she believed was her ultimate, undeniable victory. I immediately walked to my study, my heart pounding with a lawyer's adrenaline, and made 2 phone calls. The first was to Anna. The second was to Assistant District Attorney David Chen. The final act was now in motion. Saturday at the lake cabin was a study in calculated tranquility. The late summer sun cast long shadows through the towering pines, and the water of the lake was a placid, shimmering mirror. I had the large doors of the workshop thrown open, the scent of the cherry wood I was planing mingling with the clean air. Buster dozed in a sunbeam, his leg occasionally twitching as he chased dream rabbits. To any observer, it was a scene of perfect, retired peace. But it was a stage, and every prop was in its place. At precisely 12:15 p.m., just as Anna had predicted Judith's ETA based on her previous patterns, 2 vehicles rumbled up the long gravel drive. The first was Judith's gleaming black Lexus. The second was a patrol car from the county sheriff's department. The performance was about to begin. Judith emerged from her car with the air of a conquering general. Her meek vice president, Gerald, scurried out behind her, clutching a binder of documents. She intercepted the 2 deputies, a man and a woman, and began an animated, impassioned speech, pointing first at the cabin, then at me as I stepped out onto the porch, wiping my hands on a rag. I waited calmly as the officers approached, their expressions professionally neutral, but tinged with the weary look of cops who know they're stepping into a messy civil dispute. Judith and Gerald followed closely, a self-appointed jury ready to witness the verdict. "Sir," said the male deputy, whose name tag identified him as Miller, "are you Samuel Croft?" "I am. I confirmed." "Sir, we are here responding to a complaint from Ms. Sterling, the president of the Oakhaven HOA." He gestured toward Judith. "She alleges that this property is owned by the association and that you are trespassing. She has documents she claims support her position." "I see," I said, "and I have documents that support mine." Judith lunged forward, unable to contain herself. "It's not a dispute. It's a crime," she insisted, thrusting her father's marketing brochure and some cherry-picked HOA minutes at Deputy Miller. "This is community property. He is a squatter, and I, as the legal authority for the community, am demanding his immediate removal." The deputies glanced at the glossy, non-legal documents. They were in a bind. To them, this was a shouting match that could escalate. Their job was to keep the peace. Deputy Sanchez, the female officer, took the lead. "Sir," she said to me, her tone firm but not unkind, "this is clearly a civil matter for a judge to decide. But for now, to de-escalate the situation and keep the peace, we are going to ask you to please vacate the property for the remainder of the day." This was the moment, the public eviction. The ultimate humiliation Judith had engineered. Her face was a mask of pure, venomous triumph. "Of course, officers," I said, my voice steady and cooperative. "I understand you have a job to do. I will comply with your request to keep the peace." I whistled for Buster and clipped on his leash. "Gerald, call a locksmith," Judith commanded, her voice ringing across the clearing. "I want this cabin resecured immediately." As deputies Miller and Sanchez escorted me toward my truck, I stopped. I had fulfilled their request. I had complied. And now, the trap would spring. "Officers," I said calmly, turning to face them, "I appreciate your position. However, before you close this call, I must strongly advise you that you are currently being used as instruments in the commission of a crime. I would urge you to contact Assistant District Attorney David Chen. His office is expecting your call regarding this specific incident." The deputies exchanged a look of surprise. This was not the typical response from someone in a civil dispute. Mentioning a specific ADA by name changed the entire complexion of the situation. While Deputy Miller pulled out his phone, I turned my attention to Judith. Her triumphant smile had frozen on her face, replaced by a dawning look of confusion and fear. "Judith," I said, my voice taking on the precise, incisive tone of the courtroom. "The document you are holding is a marketing brochure for a defunct corporation. You know this, because that corporation was Sterling Development, your father's company." Her face went pale. "My former law firm, as you well know, handled the bankruptcy, and I personally oversaw the liquidation of assets. This cabin, this land, was never community property. It was a private asset, a fact I am sure your father, a real estate developer, was well aware of. It was sold under the authority of a federal bankruptcy court to satisfy your father's extensive debts." I reached into my jacket pocket and produced my own document. It wasn't glossy. It was a thick, multi-page legal paper, stamped and signed by the court clerk and the county recorder. This is the court-ordered quitclaim deed. It legally and irrevocably transferred the title of this property to me. What you have been doing is not just harassment, it's fraud. Deputy Miller's conversation with the DA's office was short. He hung up, his face grim. He looked at his partner, then at Judith. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now devoid of any ambiguity, "I have just spoken with the DA's office. It appears there is an active investigation into your conduct. You are under arrest for filing a false police report and for filing a fraudulent instrument with the city planning department." As if on cue, a second, unmarked car pulled up the driveway. David Chen stepped out, along with an investigator. "Judith Sterling," David said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The world had been turned upside down. The officers she had summoned to be her enforcers were now placing her in handcuffs. The law she had tried to twist into a weapon had become her cage. She had kicked me out of my cabin, and in that single, arrogant act of triumph, she had lost everything. The legal system, once engaged, moved with a grinding and inexorable logic. Judith Sterling, faced with a mountain of meticulously documented evidence and the testimony of multiple public officials, saw her fantasy world collapse into a harsh reality of courtrooms and legal bills. The district attorney's office, energized by the brazenness of her felony charge for filing a false affidavit, pursued the case vigorously. She was convicted, and though she avoided jail time, she was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a court-mandated psychological evaluation, Crucially, the conviction legally barred her for life from ever serving on a corporate or community board in the state. Her reign was over, permanently. The civil suit was a similarly brutal affair for the HOA. Anna, armed with my file, demonstrated a pattern of malicious action so clear that the HOA's insurance carrier, citing the board's gross negligence, threatened to drop their coverage entirely. To avoid a catastrophic judgment, the HOA settled. The terms were not primarily financial. I wasn't interested in bankrupting my neighbors. Instead, the settlement mandated a complete rewrite of the most ambiguous and punitive bylaws, the establishment of an independent oversight committee, and the issuance of a formal public apology to me and my late wife's memory. Judith was forced to sell her house to cover her legal fees and the personal damages the insurance wouldn't cover. The last I saw of her, she was packing a moving van, a diminished figure, her aura of command replaced by a weary, hollowed-out emptiness. I felt not triumph, but a quiet, somber sense of pity for a woman so broken by the past she had tried to rebuild its ghost in the present. With the cancer of her leadership excised, Oakhaven began to heal. The culture of fear was replaced by one of genuine neighborliness. The new board, led by a reasonable retired teacher, consulted me on the new bylaws. My fence became an accepted and even admired part of the landscape. My life settled into the quiet rhythm I had always craved. The days were marked by the satisfying work of my hands, the companionship of my dog, and the peace of the lake. I finished the workbench, its surface as smooth and true as a legal principle. I sat on the porch of my cabin, the cabin that was indisputably mine, and watched the sun set over the water, the light painting the sky in colors Helen would have loved to capture. The war was over. The case was closed. Peace, finally, had been restored.